I'm always online, so it all comes to me eventually.
Oh, that's great to hear. Well, I've been
you're
really
out there,
looking forward to this.
baby.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to having you. I mean, I think we should schedule it at least 3 times. So this is like 4 times in the making. Let's do this.
Perfect.
We're psyched, Mike, to have you on the show. You're probably going to have to do an intro because I'm not going to do it justice, and we don't usually do intros. So but I think in this case, you should definitely tell a little bit of like your story, how you got started, and then we'll just go from there. We'll see what happens.
Thanks, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. So, quick background: my name is Mike Ng, co-founder and president of Ambience Health Care. My background, very non-traditional, started off as a huge data nerd, wrote my thesis on time series prediction models of all things.
Okay. I mean,
journey into healthcare happened actually a lot later. Around 2012, I had an accident where I fractured my back.
Ooh.
On the road to recovery, I fell in love with a doctor. And it's one of those things where you would sit down on a Sunday night and you're heartbroken by seeing how much time she's spending writing notes, catching up on details with patients you saw days ago. And oftentimes it's for details she could barely remember. So it was a very important sparking moment for the journey. And soon after, I met my co-founder, Nikhil Baduma, who you may know as the author of the textbook Fundamentals of Deep Learning. One of those geniuses who actually graduated #1 in his class in computer science at MIT. And he did it in 2 years instead of 4. Apparently, that's possible if you don't sleep.
I don't even know what that.
And somehow
I don't even translate that. That's crazy,
right? And somehow I convinced him to do a crazy thing, to drop out of his MD PhD program to start companies together. And over the last decade, we worked on 2 companies and still on the same mission, which is how do you build technologies to let doctors be the best doctor they can be? You liberate them from administrative burden, enable them to really focus top license and deliver the best possible patient care.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was the first company you guys started? Walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as outsiders, one of the things we thought was we really needed to deeply understand each part of the ecosystem, what it feels like to run a care delivery asset and actually, take care of patients, hire doctors. So we did a crazy thing. We started a medical practice. And so that is
not what I thought you were going to say. But keep going.
I wasn't.
Keep going. Okay.
Well, I think it's one of those things where you gain a lot of empathy by being an operator.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You see firsthand every single day how much time it takes to do everything outside of patient care. So we're measuring actually less than a third of the time was actually directly seeing patients, but all the things will add up. You have writing notes, looking through charts to find information, looking up the latest clinical guidelines, navigating through as you know, the tens of thousands of billing codes and making sure that you have the right medical necessity for prior auth treatments, diagnostics. So I think the tough part is at the end of the day, being a clinician, you're absolutely drained. And by the time you get home, sometimes there's still even more work to do. Mm-hmm. So part of it was, look, if you created this vision, what if you could create an AI that almost felt like a clone of yourself that could do all those administrative tasks for you so you can actually spend more time on directly providing patient care? And I think at the time when we started until now, a lot of the problems we're solving were not possibly solved until language models got a lot better.
Sure. Right. So when you guys were building this practice, you're not a physician, right?
No.
We might have missed that part where you got your MD in a year or something. Your business partner was a physician or is a physician?
He was in his MD PhD program.
He was in the middle of it. Okay, gotcha. So neither of you guys are clinicians
that's right.
In truest sense.
Over the last decade or so, we've just been learning more about how to operate in that ecosystem.
Right. So what happened to that other business then? What was your what was your going in thesis, and then what was what did you learn coming out of it, whether it was successful or not successful? I mean, you could talk about that, but I'd be curious what your thoughts were going in.
A big part of it was how do you experiment and learn? And a big part is figuring out all the different specialties, what matters in that particular visit, how care is provided and all the inefficiencies in between. And we thought, look, if we were able to run our entity and test different technologies, that would be the best way to truly understand the job to be done. And if we were building software and we gave it to our doctors, and obviously they would use it every single time. And we quickly learned that actually the last mile in healthcare is sometimes the hardest mile. And every single thing needs to work. If workflow isn't easy, if whatever we're producing isn't of high quality, then clinicians just won't make the switch just because they're so busy in the day already.
Right. There's no appetite to like try something new for a long period of time and have a learning curve that's high. It's like I'm too busy to do that, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
basically what you're saying.
Indeed. And a couple of interesting things happened. So in roughly around late 2019, some of our friends were working on a small piece of technology called GPT-2. And it was the first time you saw, wait, language models have evolved in a way that it's showing intelligence like never before. And so we thought at that point in time, it's not the best use of time to build a medical practice anymore, but to build technology to help a lot of clinicians and scale. So in 2020, we actually officially started Ambience Health Care.
Gotcha. And did you sell the other company, or did you, like, what happened to that?
We just wound it down.
We wound it down. Wow.
I was going to say, was your practice profitable?
Most definitely not. I can tell you that.
Definitely no.
Yeah.
Definitely no. Yeah. What was your other takeaway from kind of like, because that's not a failure. That's just kind of like you guys did it and it worked for a while. Technology wasn't there to do anything, but you learned a bunch. I mean, what were some of your main takeaways from it?
I think the first part is having a deep appreciation of how every specialty is different and how one size fits all doesn't really work in healthcare. The second component is having a deeper empathy as to why it's so hard to be a doctor. And then also making sure that so many parts have to be absolutely right. It's kind of crazy. We're asking clinicians to not only provide care, but they also have to select the right billing codes, have to write referral letters, have to write the medical justification for a lot of the prior auths. So it's really hard. At the same time, what we found is to pick the right problem at the right time with the right enabling technologies. That's really the part that I learned a lot about. If you think about it, a lot of people say at Ambience today, we're building the right company at the right time. But truth is, Nikhil and I, we've just been in one place for a very long time, and it became the right place at the right time.
Right. Right. Well, like you said, like it didn't exist. The technology part of it didn't exist prior, right?
Yeah. So I think we trace back to all the crazy AI intelligence that we see today. A lot of it was, you look back, it's one of the conversations we had with a mentor of ours, Jeff Dean, the chief scientist of Google. And back then, around 2017, he was working on a new AI architecture for understanding language. And so this was the beginning when they thought, you know what, let's download as much text as possible off the internet and let's train to predict the next word. And it's crazy to think that just this idea of training to predict the next word was the secret to the language models. And somehow you saw it learn how to produce coherent text, sentences, paragraphs, and even full essays. And then somehow was able to reverse engineer a lot of the grammar and also fundamentals of logic, and also how it just learned so much about how the world works just by reading the internet. Subsequently, when 2019 happened, we saw the scaling laws, and if you're not familiar, basically the premise there is if you just keep adding more data in the models got smarter. And they got smarter a lot more predictably, which means that as you continue to add data, add compute, you can almost back solve to figure out what sort of intelligence you want, and then just put money against that. And so what we saw since is a lot of these big foundation model makers put in more of these technologies, and all of a sudden you see the inklings of scaling models scale up.
Interesting. So walk us through a little bit of like your thesis around ambience, because I'm curious, like I mean, everyone listening to this is going to understand the idea around like being able to take what's happening dialogue wise. Like there's some value there. I think people are going to understand there's value, but like walk us behind the thesis and then what you've, where you've kind of what's changed since that thesis. Like what your initial thoughts were and then what's changed since then. Because it's been 5 years, right? And the technology's changed in that time frame.
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about the world when we first started? It was in the middle of the pandemic. And our very first cohort of users were actually urgent care telemedicine users. Care was virtual at that point in time. So the first component we thought is how do we make it work in one setting, in one specialty, and then later expanded it to more specialties. Mm-hmm. So as we progressed and we solved urgent care telemedicine, then we moved into in-person when care moved into in-person. And then today, we're actually servicing some of the most complicated AMCs in the world. So think of it as the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinics, the UCSFs, Houston Methodists of the world. And one of the key learnings that we also learned was that ambient listening in of itself is actually an incomplete product. It's one part of an overall workflow. So, for example, as you move into, say, complex oncology, and in oncology, 70% of the visits are follow-ups. And in follow-ups, a lot more of the time is spent before the patient even comes in. You're looking at lab studies, past charts. And so by the time you actually walk into the visit, so much of the note could already be written. So if you had ambient listening write a note and you had a pre-charted note, then you're trying to jam two things together. So we did a crazy thing. We launched something called Patient Summary. Think of it as an assistant that looks through the past 18 months of a patient's clinical history, puts it into a single unified view so that clinicians can really focus on the most important things at that point in time of care. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that happened soon after is they asked, can I talk to your AI? And so we thought, why not? And we actually exposed something called Chart Chat. Think of it as ChatGPT for your EHR. But this time it's imbued with a lot of the clinical intelligence you would have, say, for example, the pathways from BMJ best practice and other care guidelines. You can actually directly pull information from calculators. You can even ask it to graft an A1C trend line, and it'll create all of that for you on the fly. And so what's interesting is then Chart Chat feeds really cleanly into what we call Patient Summary, and Patient Summary feeds into ambient listening, holding context the entire time. So nowadays, when a clinician uses Ambience and they see a note created, sometimes they say, it feels like you read my mind. And the secret here is we didn't read your mind. We actually read the EHR, so we actually fully understood the patient context. And so this is the power of how one part of the system actually leads you to have these contiguous products that solve more part of the workflow for the clinician. Until we had that, we weren't able to solve some of the more complicated specialties. And without that, you can't really service some of these complicated health systems. One of the metrics that we measured very deeply is utilization rate. So I think about it, as you start a company, you think about all the things that need to be true before you deliver value. Mm-hmm. Very beginning, you have to drive monthly active users and weekly active users. If they're not using it, they can't benefit from a tool. And then afterwards, we realized that wasn't enough because you can't tell if the clinician used it for one patient or 10 patients or all their patients, right? So we had to look at something called encounter level utilization rate. Think of it as if you had 20 patients scheduled that day, what percentage did you use it for? So it's not just actively uses, it's utilization. And then afterwards, we have to measure, are you truly saving time for the clinicians? Are you actually having a high satisfaction? And so that's how we think about driving value. After that, then you get to play the more important games, which is how do you now drive the financial metrics for a health system? And that includes making sure you get all the CDI, coding and billing right. And ultimately, in this market environment where health systems are struggling on margins, everything needs to tie back to ROI. But before you can focus on that, you have to get all the early things right. So while we started off with helping clinicians with the documentation burden, we somehow strayed into your world, Ben, revenue cycle.
Well, everything ends up there somehow. It all runs downhill. Mike, I'm curious though on the. I think I understand. I mean, you're talking some technical stuff. Tina's probably like, "What in the world?"
No, I have several questions. I'm ready.
So,
I'm ready.
well, yeah, we'll get there. Just give me a sec. So, if I'm understanding correctly, when they're listening, let's just say listening in a visit, a visit's happening, doctor's visiting someone in a room. Ambience is listening. Your technology is listening. It's creating note from that visit, right? So like their interaction, but it also has context of a deeper chart. So it actually has gone through and understands at least some context. Because I imagine if it was just one, which is probably a problem you had in the beginning, was like if it's just listening to one interaction, it might take some they take it out of context. In other words, like it doesn't fully understand. It just knows the interaction, right? Which may not be the full story. But you're saying now that we have this other piece of like the summarization, it understands this longer history, which there's always a longer history with most complex patients. That it can actually do this note much more accurately than it was before. Am I saying this right? Just making
That's
sure I understand.
100% right.
Okay.
Well, you think about it, it's two components. The first part is you have to serve the clinician holistically in their workflow, and time is spent before the patient even comes in. So that's why we had to build recap, and that's why we had to build chart chat. But that context of understanding that patient holistically is part of the secret sauce and why ambient listening works so well at Ambience. You think about as a clinician, you're actually reading, prepping, thinking, and not everything in the visit is verbalized out loud. So having that context to understand that the entire care context is one of the very important parts and insights of building Ambience.
Makes total sense. I guess I wasn't even thinking about that part, but it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Tina, what do you got?
Okay. Well, I want to roll back. So when you started with telehealth in 2020, I'm assuming that the tool itself was simpler then, because the world, like the context, even like if we just use Riverside here, where we're talking as the context, right? There's much less to listen to and record, right? To pay attention to in these three little boxes. So I'm assuming the tool is simpler then.
It's like a
That had to
very
become more
control.
advanced.
It's controlled environment, right? Like it's always
Right.
going to record the right way it's going through a computer versus like when we are in person doing a podcast, it's actually much harder.
Right.
I actually have to have other things in place. If that,
Yeah, and
corollary.
in urgent care, you can imagine almost by definition, there's new information and new information is being captured. And so the
For sure.
importance of going back to understand that longitudinal context of the patient was less important.
Mm-hmm.
But as we moved into some of the complicated, larger health systems with, say, for example, at Cleveland Clinic, it's not one thing, it's actually home to 100 different specialties and subspecialties.
Right.
And all the medicines is different.
Mm-hmm.
The workflow is different. How you get paid is different. And so we have to really think through all of the different parts of the workflow, patient recap, or patient summary, chart chat, and how that feeds into the coding and billing pieces. But the other part is also understanding that the modality changes. So, for example, in the emergency room, for example, you're actually seeing patients that come in, they may stay there for several hours, maybe even like 9, 10, 12 hours. And you need to know when to pop up the right information to the doctor at the right time. If patient comes in with a fractured leg, you have to pop up fracture care documentation. A trauma victim comes in, you have to have critical care documentation. So really knowing how to build every part of that workflow to be seamless for the clinician ended up to be way harder than we ever thought, but it was absolutely necessary to drive utilization rate.
Mike, how did you solve the? I'm a logistical question. Like, technically, how did you solve the actual physical listening in each one of the rooms?
We just use a smartphone, and you can. At the beginning of your day, you'll select you'll see the patient list that you're going to see, and then it'll know which patients you're seeing. And then once the patient walks in, you press record. It would record this visit. At the end of the actual visit, it will generate a draft of the documentation. And importantly here, we also help select the right CPT and ICD-10 codes. And that actually gives the model a lot of information about the particular visit. And
That makes sense.
sequentially, we would
Right.
make sure that, for example, in a value-based care environment, we help with the most appropriate, most accurate ICD-10 code first and foremost, and then actually wrap documentation around it so that meet criteria is very easy to see by problem.
That makes sense. So the doc has like an Ambience issued phone, brings it around, I'm assuming, and then they just select the right patient, start it up, and it can produce and connect back to the system. Is that
That's totally right.
wow? Yeah, that's great. I was curious to know if it was like already you like have to set up microphones in all the rooms. It's like, oh,
Right,
what's
right.
happening? It's crazy. That makes more sense.
Indeed.
And then my next question, because I have 3 of them, is because the language around medical is so specific, and then as you talked about like going into specialties, did you have to build like specific libraries for the model to learn from, or did you just like let it loose in the world to learn? Like how did it learn like the language of oncology in order to again build those codes or know what words to assign to what coding? I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the challenges is how do you turn a generally intelligent model into one that's clinically intelligent that understands the medicine being provided in that particular visit?
For sure.
And then more importantly also, what is the job to be done? So we realized we quickly hit the limits of what off-the-shelf models can do. And we actually partnered with OpenAI, and we actually fine-tuned a lot of models on top to teach it, for example, when it makes a mistake on certain clinical tasks. So internally, we actually have a very big AI research team with a lot of clinicians who actually figure out where the models are hitting limits and what are the different things we can do to improve. For example, the first thing you would try is prompt engineering. And if that doesn't work, then you have to use some of these more advanced techniques. So we have custom fine-tuned models by subspecialty. And in many times, we actually have to break that down into different visit types as well, because you would look for different things and you'll write things in a different way. On top of learning the clinical aspect, we actually had to train our models on understanding of ICD-10s as well. So it was one of those incredibly hard tasks, especially when you move to V28 and you have so many codes, so much specificity required. We actually had to release a custom fine-tuned model that actually outperformed all available benchmarks by 27%.
Nice. Of course.
Yeah. And that's
So
the
does
key.
it know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Does it know like the clinician, so when it's assigned to a clinician, does it know like I'm a dermatologist or a podiatrist or whatever? So it's
100%.
specific to like what I do instead of being general to all medicine.
That's right. So that was our clear stance on how we built Ambience at the beginning, in that it was never going to be one size fits all. And that was some of the learnings we had from our previous company, in that every single specialty, subspecialty focused on different medicine, different workflows, different parts of coding and billing matter. So instead of building one product, we're actually building, think of it as like 100 different sub-products that's specialized by the clinician.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
It's really interesting.
Are you looking for a judgment-free revenue cycle space? Do you want to expand your revenue management skills and learn insider strategies? Check out RevCycle 101. Unlock the foundations of healthcare finance with RevCycle 101, a comprehensive course designed to give anyone, from a recent graduate taking their first professional steps to a seasoned sales leader refining their expertise, the clarity and confidence to excel in revenue cycle management. Through easy-to-understand terminology, practical tools, and proven methods, this course demystifies the complexities of the revenue cycle. It equips you with the skills to drive results, optimize operational efficiency, and significantly advance your career in the shifting realities of today's healthcare industry. Click the link in the description for more information. Now back to the show.
Okay, this might be a long question, but I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he's at General Motors, and General Motors is an interesting company because it's a safety first company. Like they're all about safety, right? And and it's weaved into their culture. It's really fascinating. So you can say what you want about GM, but I do think it's very interesting. One of the things that um, they're talking about and working on now is that they've mapped out a they're getting close to the 1 billion-mile range on automated driving, right? Because they had this Super Cruise, which, by the way, I rode in. And it is pretty incredible. It really is. It's like the super on the highways, and I know Tesla has their own version, and it's doing better on like street level. But what's fascinating is he was saying that like they're running into now the 1 billion-mile problems that come up, that are so random and statistically like never going to happen, but does happen. And he's like, these are the important things because it's like you're hitting more and more of the milestones of like, and he gave me an example of like, it's raining out and a tire blows out and the person comes in front of the car, it's like, what do you do? And because you don't run into those in the first 100 million miles. And I thought that was really fascinating. And like thinking about the learning as you go of like the really random, low statistical probability, but pops up. And in medicine, I'm sure there's all kinds of those things. I'm curious to know, where do you think, if there's a corollary? I don't know if there's a corollary, but of the scale, like, are you at 100 million miles in like miles traveled, or are you like we're getting to the 1 billion-mile mark because we're hitting all these really random, statistically tiny things? And I don't know if this question makes sense, but I think because you're doing a similar type thing, miles driven versus like experience hours.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll break down the question in a couple of components. Number one is, where do you see the long tail? And then the
Exactly.
second component is, how do you build a machine to continuously learn and improve? So what we found is actually, after seeing, tens and thousands, hundreds of thousands of primary care visits, you're not learning that much that's different. But then later on, as you move from some of the community health systems to the leading AMCs, things get very difficult very quickly, because oftentimes you're seeing the hard 10% in primary care that then gets referred out to a specialist, and then the hard 10% that they can't do that then end up at Cleveland Clinic, for example.
Right. Which is like the 0.1% of the total, right? Yeah.
Right. But that's the
Yeah.
baseline. When you work with a leading AMC, they're there because it's a really difficult case. So strategically, we've actually worked very closely with these organizations early, because that is where you train the very best models that then actually lift tides for all clinicians afterwards. So that's part of our strategy on work, getting the best feedback loop to learn the best medicine from the very best clinicians.
Do you ever do like, Mike, sorry to interrupt, but do you ever catch, I was on the board of this like rare disease that a friend of mine's son has, and it's super rare, right? But it's, I didn't realize all this, but there's tons of those rare diseases, like that are not the same thing. They're just like super rare, right? And do you ever find like the model starting to be like, tell the physician, hey, this could be X. Do you see it coming there? Or like, hey, have you thought about this other thing? Because you guys would have more of like the basics of the basis to be able to identify things like that.
So far we're helping clinicians to focus on providing care and automate documentation and coding and all the upstream work, but we're not actually diagnosing the patient. So we're always letting the clinician do the most important clinical decision making. And therefore, our machine's actually learning from how they're actually diagnosing, but we're never actually doing the work for them. That being said, we do hit really difficult edge cases, and every week I'm learning something new. For example, last week we had our first super long visit. It was 3 hours, 40 minutes in a complex neurology patient. And there are different challenges there because, number one, just the sheer context that gets built up over such a long period of time. it was challenging to figure out, the needle in the haystack problem, to pull out the right information, know what's conflicting and what's not. But then as we start hitting these edge cases, we actually have a team that systematically figures out where we can improve. So you mentioned self-driving cars. Our head of engineering, Brendan Fortuna, was actually co-founder of ML Platforms at Cruise, literally a self-driving car company. There's a lot of learnings we can take from self-driving. The first component is you're always going to see the big plethora of cases you see often, but you always need to look out for the edge cases as well. And the edge cases are really important because these are important learning moments. If there's something that, for example, we wrote a part of the note and we saw that the clinician actually edited on top, we can go back and now figure out, wait, what exactly did we miss there? And is there a way for us to improve? And again, that feeds through to our improvement engine with our internal clinical AI teams. And if it's a part where we hit a hard edge, we got to figure out, are we going to invest in really heavy fine tuning in order to teach the model something new?
Right. Because I'm assuming you're having like clinical team go through that 3-hour and 40-minute visit.
Yeah.
In its own way to try to figure out like, okay, where can we be better? Because that has to be super, super complex.
Very, very much so. And that learning engine, it takes a lot of things to get right. So maybe we take a step back. One of the things we invest on very early is actually a dashboard that helps us to understand how clinicians are actually using Ambience. What that means is that at any particular health system, we can track who's using Ambience at each point in time, for which specialties, for which visit, and which visit types. For example, when we first started, we realized that for some reason we had low utilization rate in the counter level for pediatrics. And one of the reasons there is that in well-child visits, it's a lot of structured data. And at that point in time, we didn't build any engines to pull structured data out yet. So that's one challenge. And then we realized there was actually a hidden component because in many well-child visits, the parent would also say, oh, but what about that rash? And so in that case, you're also providing an acute care visit. And yeah, as you know, you have to add a modifier 25. But a lot of times clinicians, they're just busy. They provide the care and, patient walks out the room. It may never be documented, never be coded. And so again, the ability for us to actually drill down and look at it from a visit type level allows us to figure out what is the shape of the problem. And then our clinical AI research teams and product managers actually go on site, hand in hand, elbow to elbow, to actually figure out how to improve. We strongly believe that innovation must happen where work is done. And so that's a big part of getting from that dashboard to that locally staffed team and then that learning engine with our clinical AI team.
So true. You can often find yourself creating a product for not the real issue. So if you're not careful, right?
Yeah.
You can find yourself in a weird spot if you don't live it with the people that are actually day to day going through it. That's really good insight.
It's that learning engine that really matters.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the hidden complexity here is building that dashboard was way harder than we ever thought. And here's the learning. In most of technology, it's really hard to know if someone's actually using your software and they're using it well and it's actually driving value. We go to a lot of conferences, and when health system leaders talk about some of the tools they use, the metrics are really high level. It's hard for them to drill down what exactly is encounter level utilization, let alone like what it is by specialty. And so one of the things we learned is that unless you actually have that visibility, how could you possibly improve? And so we built that engine internally, and we're very lucky because Josh Cowdy from our team actually a long time ago was part of the team that worked on Epic Signal. And so he was there figuring out how do clinicians spend time in charts, pajama time, and every part in between, and what are the raw pieces of information they can do to reconstruct the dashboard. He's built probably the most comprehensive visibility engine. And instead of just using it internally, we have that shared dashboard with our health system partners so they can see performance. And so we can sit there together to figure out how we want to improve. And when we sit there for these quarterly business reviews, we share our statistics and share what we're working on. And we also share at the end of that quarter how much better we did versus expectations.
But also, like, what physicians are using it, which ones aren't, right? I'm sure you're still having, there's got to be a small number of adoption issues, right?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things is, let's use one example. So Cleveland Clinic, a fantastic institution, and they wanted to be very careful in selecting the right partner. So what they did was they invited anyone to apply, and they picked the top 5 vendors to pilot with them. And that was same clinicians, 40 clinicians over various different specialties, and they rotated and tried different technologies. And what's interesting, at the end of the pilot period, they showed that Ambience had an 80% encounter level utilization rate. So of all the users and all the visits, we had 80%. The next best solution was less than half, and the next after that was less than a third. So this was probably for the first time they can see visibility as what you're mentioning is like, where's it working, where it's not. 80% is actually incredibly high. The industry expectation is like closer to 30, 40%. Now, one question there afterwards is, well, if you're using it, are you really benefiting? So they also looked at the Net Promoter Score, or NPS score. We achieved, during the pilot, a 60. The next best was 12. And every solution after that was literally negative. So on top of that, one of the questions is, was that just a pilot? What happens when you roll this out at scale? So what's interesting is within 3 months, we actually rolled out to 80% of all the ambulatory and ED clinicians at Cleveland Clinic successfully, which again, in many ways, it breaks a lot of paradigm, because we used to think that behavior change, workflow change takes a long time. But if you truly perfect a piece of software and tool so it's iPhone easy to use, and the clinical quality and notes that come out are actually accurate and to the specificity you're required for that specialty, then adoption can be very fast.
Right. If they can see it happening quickly, like you'll get all kinds of people to adopt it that normally wouldn't even touch it, right?
I think that's right, in that the key here is having a very thoughtful rollout process. We say slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So we don't do big bang rollout at the beginning. We actually go back and figure out, for this particular institution, the way they want to provide care and in their workflow, have we perfected in those specialties? And only when you've set that base correctly, that's when we actually bring in our first cohort of users who become happy users, and the happy users then tell all their friends. You generate that demand, and then you have these very thoughtful onboarding and training systems. So you'll notice at Ambience, we don't call our teams customer success, we call them care transformation. Because that's what it really is, in that there are very particular steps you require to use Ambience on version 1, version 2, version 3. Most organizations still know Ambience as one of our first products, which is ambient listening. But as you heard, in reality, we have an entire suite of capabilities to help clinicians. But when we first engage, we don't need to have everything turned on at the same time. We just want to show value, earn trust, and over time add more of those capabilities.
Yeah, that's great. Really interesting. So, Mike, let's fast forward. You've been doing this 5 years. In 5 years from now, where do you see the business? Where do you see, like, what are you guys doing? Like, what does it look like? Because I'm imagining it's going to be, even so much farther along, it's hard to grasp your mind around. But I'm curious to know what you think. What is it going to be in 5 years?
That's a really good question. So I think the intelligence and the ability to help clinicians is going to actually expand on both sides. So we started with the heart of the conversation, the kernel, which is ambient listening. We moved upstream. So patient recap or patient summary became a really important part of our entire stack. Now, what's interesting here is it's not a general summary. It's actually a lot of clinical reasoning to figure out what are the right things to actually summarize for that patient for that particular visit. And as models get more intelligent, our summaries get better. And then you think about the beginning of Chart Chat, it was a better way to search information on the EHR. But nowadays we have more calculators embedded. And we're able to, on the fly, ask questions and get answers, pull the trend line for A1Cs. And then we're imbuing more clinical care pathways and guidelines over time. So as you can imagine, that's going to get smarter and smarter, and it'll be a better co-pilot for clinicians to figure out how best to take care of that patient. It'll almost be speaking with some of your best colleagues to soundboard on what to focus on the patient. But in the future, that clinical intelligence wouldn't be just for one specialty. It'll have the sum total knowledge of all specialties. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is you think about when we finish the visit, we produce an after-visit summary for the patient. And that summary actually helps the patient better understand in that critical moment in care, what are you diagnosed with? What does it mean? What's your care plan? What are your options? And when do you need to come back? So previously, that was a static piece of paper. Today, this is actually a very tailored summary based on what was spoken in the actual visit, but translated to the right patient language so that the patient and their care team and the family members understand how to take care of their conditions. But in the future, there's an opportunity, just like how we turn patient summary into Chart Chat, we're going to turn the after-visit summary into a continuous conversation over time. And so that's probably going to be a very exciting part because it extends care outside of the four walls, gives patient a greater touch point and access to get information about the chronic disease and how to take care of themselves. And over time, it's probably going to be one of the critical tools that they would talk to every single day. So that's one component. Clinically, from a clinician standpoint, there's going to be some sort of metaphorical Iron Man suit, so to speak, in that we talked about earlier that only a third of the day is spent providing care, but our goal has always been, how do you flip that? How do you create an intelligent, almost like a clone of yourself to do all the administrative tasks so that anything outside of providing care is going to be automated for the clinicians so they can truly focus on connecting with the patient. From the revenue cycle side, this is something that's interesting too, because you think about a lot of the challenges that we have today. You have clinicians charged with providing care, but at the same time, they have to select CPT codes, ICD-10 codes. And if we're honest, most of them don't fully understand all the changing regulations, when it applies, how you're supposed to write a note. We've seen, for example, some of the changes in E&M from some of the payers. And then also, if you think about the transition from V24 to V28, some of those ICD-10s don't map to the same HCCs anymore. You may need to actually document with a greater specificity. And again, clinicians are busy and they can't remember all these rules. And even if they do it, how do they get time to do this? At the same time, you have clinical rev cycle and mid-rev cycle, and their jobs are so hard because you have a note. And sometimes if you haven't co-trained the model to understand the clinical aspect and the coding aspect, and you get the clinicians to select the codes themselves, what we've seen several years ago is that some of the earlier ambient listening solutions create more problems. You have notes and codes that don't match each other. And typically you have to kick that back with a CDI query, and then the clinician needs to say, oh, what really happened with that patient? Can't really remember. And then they actually have to go amend that note. even if they did that perfectly, you undid all of the time saved and satisfaction from ambient listening. So again, this paradigm is going to change. What Ambience created is a system that actually generates documentations and the codes correct, complete, compliant at the point of care the first time. In your world, Ben, you're used to clinical rev cycle having many different layers. You have layer 1, layer 2, and layer 3, different checks they'll have. We're creating this new idea of layer 0. So instead of being reactive, you can be proactive. And this time our machine has learned all of the payer requirements and all of the payer rules and applies that there at the point of note generation. What's interesting is we recently launched something called the HCC Validator. And what that does is we thought, if we're able to create a series of graders and actually tell the clinician have they met all the requirements before they selected the code, and if they're missing parts of documentation, they can add that before the patient even leaves the room. And so the user interface there is you'll have these series of almost like traffic lights to figure out, have you met all the compliance standards? So you take the guesswork out of what do they think the insurance companies need, but actually make that clear and obvious to the clinicians so that we make best practice standard practice every single time. What that's going to enable over time is, as we get closer and closer to perfection, then we're able to actually have the documentation, have the codes, have all the audit trails showing all the reasoning, down to which part of the EHR we found the information, down to which part of the conversations we covered each part of the plan. And that will become the source of truth for both payers and providers. And when we get to that world, that is what will enable auto adjudication at the point of care. And once you have that, then potentially this becomes the source of truth machine where payers and providers can just agree and pay right there at the point of care.
I mean, I like what
Utopia.
you're saying. Yeah, I like what you're saying. I don't know if they would think that, but I know what you're saying. I would agree that you're getting much closer to the world in which you could do things real time. But I just don't know if they would really want that, even if it's available technology-wise. But that's interesting on so many levels. I do think I'm in total agreement on the way that we're gonna interact, right, is gonna change over time. That we're gonna be talking more, right? That's what you were saying about the Iron Man. They'll have their own Jarvis version. Because that is, like you were saying, I think that is the way that you get to where you're doing 2/3 or more of your time is actually patient care, because you've got something else kind of making sure and doing all the things that they were doing before, which you guys are getting close. It's just, the technology will get better and better. It's fascinating. I love what you're doing, man. That's very cool. I think it's also just so necessary. We got to do something different. Physicians are, no one really wants to go into that world anymore. So I would love to see that change on so many levels. I don't know, Tina, any other thoughts?
Well, I just had one quick question about about like the review process from the clinician standpoint. When people started first using the tool, or clinicians did you find they had instant trust in the tool? I can't imagine they did, but maybe they did. Or did you find they were like reviewing those notes and had to take some time to really place their trust in it?
Oh, I love the question of trust. Internally, we have this saying: before you can solve the technology gap, you have to solve the trust gap.
For sure. Because I don't know. Because I'd be like, I write for people, so like I'll do conversations and I have a transcription tool and they'll give them the thing, and I read, and I was in the conversation, so I know what happened, and I read those notes and I'm like, what? so I'm just thinking, and I am speaking the same language as the person who's in the call with me, and I, like many of the barriers that I could imagine exist in a care situation are erased, right? So I was just, I have to imagine there's some issues there.
Yeah. So my co-founder Nikhil and I, we actually still every now and then onboard clinicians ourselves. In fact, we get everyone that joins Ambience to really get close to users very quickly to get that empathy. I remember there was this one time we work in an institution based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And there's always one clinician, they'll say, in that if you can get X person, call her Jane, for example, if Jane will use it, then anyone will use it. So we went over and we personally went to onboard Jane. Now, the caveats that they'll share is that they're saying, hey, I love taking care of patients. I'm really struggling with documentation. I'm not a tech person. I don't really use technology, but I'm happy to try it to, give you feedback. And so this is one where you actually get them to test it for the first time. After a couple of visits, they actually had a staff meeting over lunch, and she was reading the notes that we created. And she literally cried. I think clinicians have been overpromised on tools for so long that the expectations for technology have gotten so low.
Right.
And that truly works for the first time, that actually is accurate, compliant, complete. You see the joy on their face, but that trust has to be earned. And there's no website, no marketing material that'll ever share that. It's the experience the clinician has, that moment of magic when they see the notes first come back.
That's awesome.
It's so true, though.
Approved by Jane's tears. Like, that's your new tagline.
I think, look, I would say
That's right. You need a new tagline.
the number of clinicians that have sent letters to their CMOs, CMIOs, letting them know that because of this technology, they've delayed retirement, delayed leaving the industry. I mean, that's the reason why we hear these. That's the reason that drives our team. The trust component, it's not just at the clinician level. It's also at the organization level. So when we first partner with an organization, we look like any other vendor. There is no reason for them to give us trust. We have to earn it. So the way we do this is we very humbly ask them, like, if we just started with ambient listing, what does success look like for you? Like, what would it take for us to show you that we're the right partner for the long term? And for them to actually set the metrics that they want us to meet, and for us to go through and not just meet it, but exceed it. Over time, what we've learned is they learn trust from two perspectives, and they start believing. They believe not only that technology can truly impact the lives of the clinicians, patients, and provide better care at lower cost with a better experience for everyone, but also that we're the right partner for all the other things to come. When we first start, we have the conversation of alleviating clinician burden, and we have to do that first and foremost. But that's when we start actually having conversations about what else we can do together. The patient summary, the chart chat, the revenue cycle initiatives. But it all starts by earning trust at the very beginning.
Mike, this has been awesome. Before you leave, you had said one thing earlier. I want you to say again, because I think it was really important. I picked up on it. You said something about being slow and smooth, or smooth as fast, or something like that. Can you say it again? Because I thought that was you skipped through it, but I thought it was super impactful.
No, I think we say slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And there are times yeah, and you really have to think through for each institution, what really matters to them, for each specialty, for each specialist, the medicine being delivered, the workflow, the payment challenges, and solve the problem holistically before you scale. I think oftentimes certain builders and vendors may rush to scale too quickly. And inherently, if you get that wrong, you don't get a second chance at getting clinicians to try the tool again. and you don't get a second chance at winning the trust of revenue cycle and compliance. So what we do at the beginning is have extremely thoughtful team members who are almost like co-design partners to spend time at the institution, elbow to elbow, to make sure that we're solving the right problem in a complete and compliant way. And only then do we move to phase 2, which will bring in a little more users and get more proof points. And then we move to organization-wide scaling.
Love it. I love that saying. It's as so many rev cycle company vendors could benefit from just doing what you just described. Always promising something really fast, and it's like, that's not fast. Smooth is the fast, right? So smooth will feel fast. So I love it.
Yeah, one of the things we think about is focus on the basics. If we do a really good job and we have happy clinicians, we have happy health system leaders, they'll end up creating incredible case studies. And this is a very small industry, and everybody knows each other. So some of the wins that we had, for example, at St. Luke's, traveled over to the leaders at Kootenai in the same market. And then from Kootenai, we moved to multi-care. And some of the friends that introduced us to St. Luke's was Houston Methodist, and now we're partnered with them. Really, it's about showing that we're different, showing that we can execute well, and showing that every single quarter we're doing better than what we did last and continue to improve.
Oh, that's it. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike, for joining us. Really appreciate it. It was super insightful. I think people will really gain knowledge out of this one, so I appreciate it. Joining the show.
Thanks,
Ben.
Mike.
Thanks, Tina.
And you prove, look at love can change the world, baby. That's my takeaway.
It most certainly can.
All right. Thanks, Mike. We appreciate it.
Thank you both. Take care.
Well, Tina, what did you think? What were your thoughts?
I think, like, first of all, just the integrity around what they're building and what they're doing seems just solid. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Like,
it's it's
and exactly what they said. Slow, slow and smooth is fast. Like, an incredible approach and focusing on the basics. Like it's like everything you want to hear in a partner.
I mean, you want like, you think AI and like all these things can do some of these things. Well, obviously what we've seen is like, in other worlds, it's like it's not producing as what people hope. But I think it's also like it's a slow race. So
Right.
he's not thinking it's a sprint. It's like, no, let's solve these little things and then continue to this. But the whole thing is, it's coming. It's just, you got to continue to build on what you've done. I think it's just like, it speaks to the power of like what the future is going to be, because I don't think he's wrong on the Jarvis example. I think that's accurate.
Well, I know, and I think the point that you made, you brought it up, and then he affirmed that it's not diagnosing, but the fact is that at some point it's going to start cross-referencing and drawing conclusions, right? Like that's what happens. That is, I think, an obvious next step.
Yeah, that's the thing I think like clinicians hopefully will embrace, is this not just taking the administrative burden off, which I think is important, but also
Of
like
course.
it's helping, enhancing their capability. My hope is that they would see it this way, as enhancing the capability of somebody who's just a human.
Right.
Because I can't tell you how many stories I have of like friends or people associated with this, nonprofit I was talking about, is where it's like, if they hadn't had this one person step in the room and be like, oh, I think I've heard of this before.
Right.
Which is wild, right? Like,
right. Because you can't know everything.
You can't know everything.
But interestingly, a machine can. Right?
Yeah,
it can, because it has resources you don't have.
Pick up on something where it's like, hey,
right,
have you guys thought about these 3 things? It's like,
right.
Oh, But the danger there is like people just don't want to.
Well, it's the danger of, right, WebMD. I'm an internet doctor,
Well,
like it's the danger of humans
No,
drawing
no.
conclusions. Right.
I think it's the danger that they don't actually use it. They'll just ignore it.
Oh, sure.
I think that's where I think that you're going to see a pushback because it's like, well, the identity of like the doctor knows all.
Oh.
And so you have to like, that's
my least favorite identity
that's a
of
commonplace,
doctors.
right? Like ego, like the ego driven. So you kind of have to,
Sure.
they're going to have to accept the fact that like this thing is actually like helping me think through things. I think he's got the right mentality. Most people would. I gotta believe most doctors would see that as like a real benefit, not the opposite. But I don't know. We'll see. It's fascinating.
It is.
It was. I didn't. So just so everyone knows, we did not get paid for that. It was a little of probably too much of a commercial. I'm not blaming Mike for that. That's just I think he's passionate about what they're doing at Ambience.
No, for sure.
So don't take that the wrong way. We certainly. Just wanted to hear about what he's doing. So for those who are listening, just FYI. Yeah.
No, it was super
great.
interesting. I think there was a question I did miss because I think that Ken, who came to the Tarpon conference, and he brought up a point about how like some of the GPTs like time out at 2 hours or 2.5 hours or something. And then he said that one thing was like 3.5 hours. And I wondered how like their software handled that, but I didn't bring it up. So.
Yeah, no, you're talking about the computation time.
Yeah,
I didn't. Yeah, we didn't get into that. I wonder. I'm sure they're doing their own version.
I'm sure they are.
The question is just like over time, how expensive is it going to be?
Right.
And that price.
And
I'm
how
sure
much
will
water
drop.
are they using to cool those servers?
Yeah, a lot.
I have a lot of environmental.
There's no doubt about that. But yeah, no, it's just that was a whole nother. Yeah, I didn't even think about that part. But you're right. That's a whole nother thing that I'm sure they're trying to solve for. So.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
So much
stuff.
information.
Yeah.
It's great to learn about these things.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. This is another episode of RevCycle Unscripted. We're still working on recording. I don't know. I got nothing.
We'll be back.
Got nothing else.
We'll be back with more.
All right. Talk to everybody later. Thanks.